So today we're taking a look at the new trailer for Rocketman. If you don't know what that is, it's a new Elton John biopic that's coming out in a few months actually. So this one's interesting for me because I go into this similar to how a lot of people would have gone into Bohemian Rhapsody. You know, knowing who Queen was, knowing their music, but not really knowing the full story behind Queen and Freddie Mercury. So that's me in this case. I know Elton John's music, I know who he is of course, I like a few of his songs, but I definitely don't know the full story. So it's going to be interesting to see what his story was like. Now, as we know, this movie is coming off the huge success of Bohemian Rhapsody. So the question is though, will that help or hinder Rocketman? I think Elton John's obviously very popular and, you know, has a lot of fans and is hugely successful with his music, but I don't think he's quite at the same level that Queen are. This film probably doesn't have the same amount of interest that Bohemian Rhapsody did going in. So I think potentially with the success of Bohemian Rhapsody, a lot of people had gone and seen that. I think people could see this as kind of the next Bohemian Rhapsody and will therefore be pretty excited for a film that they may not have been interested in before because they did like, you know, last year's model, so to speak. On the other hand, Bohemian Rhapsody coming out last year could actually be a bit of a problem for Rocketman. You know, the fact that these movies are so close together, for a lot of people, they could just see it as the same or a similar type of movie, you know. This movie could always be in the shadow of Bohemian Rhapsody regardless of which one is actually better. So I think it could go either way. I think it's much more likely that Bohemian Rhapsody's success is going to get a lot more people to see Rocketman that may not have seen it otherwise. At the same time, I think it could go the other way. So who knows? It'll be interesting to see how one affects the other. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if Rocketman is just as big a success as Bohemian Rhapsody, or even close to being as big a success. Could that start a new trend of every year or two we have this big kind of event biopic movie that's, you know, based on a classic music figure? I always kind of thought that if Bohemian Rhapsody was a success, it would inspire other artists and studios, film studios, to go after the stories of other kind of classic bands and musicians from that era. Especially if Rocketman is a success, I think that if these two films can come out, if they can both be really successful, then it could start this new trend that studios try to take hold of, and, you know, you start seeing other music biopics that are big events at certain points in the film calendar. You know, bands like Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, The Who, the Beatles, these are all kind of artists from a similar era that could potentially have their story transformed into and adapted into a big screen film. The other common link between Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman, of course, is the fact that Dexter Fletcher, who is the director of Rocketman, took over directing duties on Bohemian Rhapsody for the last couple weeks or so of filming after Bryan Singer was fired. Just looking at the Rocketman trailer, it does feel to me like there is a similar visual style between the two films. You know, Rocketman does have a similar kind of look to the way Bohemian Rhapsody looks. That's probably me just reading too much into the fact that, you know, Dexter Fletcher worked on both, because he didn't work on Bohemian Rhapsody for very long. The majority of that film is what Bryan Singer shot. I think naturally these two films might have a similar look to them. Dexter Fletcher did work on both, as we say. On top of that, there are also films that are set in a similar time period around a similar kind of industry as well, so they're bound to have a few visual similarities given they're set within that same kind of 70s era. Now, one of the things that Rocketman is doing very different from your typical biopic is that it is introducing elements of musical, I believe, into this film. So whereas your traditional music biopic would have music performance scenes from live concerts and from writing and recording songs, it seems like we're going to get a bit of that in this movie, as well as getting scenes that are more typical in musicals where people just start singing randomly and then go back to their daily lives. Now, I think most people will like that about this film, and it will make it quite unique in a lot of people's eyes. I'm not a huge fan of musicals. I think the whole idea of people just randomly singing and dancing in the streets and then just going back to their daily lives is just weird, and it just really pulls me out of the immersion of the story. You know, if you're telling a story and there are realistic elements to it, and then you just start random sing and dance and have a song in the middle, and then it's just back to the story, that just seems weird to me, and I don't like that. So it could definitely be that's the part of the film that I particularly don't like. Another thing they are doing in this film is elements of fantasy. We do see a lot of shots in this trailer, one where Elton falls in the pool and he sees someone underwater there, you know, playing a piano, I think it is. And we see the shot of him when he's a child in his bedroom, you know, conducting an orchestra and all this kind of stuff. So there's going to be these fun fantasy type elements, and that could actually go a long way to helping me be able to, you know, watch those kind of musical parts of the film. You know, if this is how they explain it, we know they're covering his drug addiction, so, you know, if this is the kind of stuff he's seeing because of he's high on drugs, or because of his imagination, especially when he's a child, the imagination of a child. If that's how they explain these kind of over-the-top musical elements, that could go a long way, and that could be the explanation I need, you know. Like I say, musical elements just don't make sense to me and it pulls me out of the story, but if you have an explanation like this, like it's all in his head, that could actually really work for me and would be very interesting to kind of explore how the mind works of someone who creates, you know, great music like this. But I think these kind of fantasy elements will go a long way to making this film quite unique, and I think a lot of people will like that about this. Another thing to remember about this film is that Taron Egerton, who is playing Elton John, is doing a decent amount of the singing in this. I don't know if it's all, I don't know how they plan on using him exactly. Obviously we see him in the trailer doing some singing, and on top of that though we also get some original Elton John vocals, so I don't know what the balance is going to be here between real Elton John vocals and Taron Egerton singing. In Bohemian Rhapsody we saw them use Mark Martel in a number of parts of the film where they just didn't have the vocals of Freddie singing that particular song or what have you. So for example, they had him auditioning for Smile at the very start of the film in the alleyway, and obviously they don't have Freddie singing Doing Alright in an alleyway, so they have to go and get Mark Martel to record those kind of vocals. I know for me as a Queen fan that I could immediately tell the difference when it was Mark Martel or when it was Freddie's original vocals. So I don't know, if you're an Elton John fan, maybe let me know. Do you want this movie to have mostly Elton John vocals from the original recordings, or would you rather it be Taron Egerton? Because for me, going into Bohemian Rhapsody, I definitely wanted as much Freddie vocals as they could put in the film, as it made sense to, you know, because if you have someone else's voices coming out of the speakers, it even more pulls you out of the immersion. You know, you've got someone there who looks a lot like the character you know, a lot like the person you know. If it's a different voice, it can help ruin that illusion. You know, for me, if it's the same voice you're used to hearing on all the recordings and stuff, then it helps you believe the visual of what you're seeing a little bit better. You know, it helps you immerse yourself and believe that that is actually Freddie Mercury or that is actually Elton John on screen. So if you're a fan of Elton John though, which would you prefer? Mostly Taron Egerton to go along with the image, or would you rather original Elton vocals to help you kind of believe what you're seeing a bit more? One thing we do see in the trailer is that this film is going to focus on a bit of Elton John's childhood, back when he was Reginald Dwight, so it will be interesting to see that aspect of, you know, his character and how that influenced him as he grew up and, you know, got into his work and his music. One thing I think this film is doing is that it is focusing more on a certain part of Elton John's career rather than focusing on his entire life and career. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, because obviously Bohemian Rhapsody focused on the vast majority of Queen's career and Freddie's life in that film, in the one film. So it'll be interesting to see which biopic approach works best, you know. You imagine focusing on a smaller time period will allow for more depth in each scene, you know, more time spent developing each aspect and each part of the story. Will people feel like they're missing out on part of the story if you don't tell the majority of the career in one film? Or will they actually feel like they got more detail out of the story that focuses on a smaller time period? So interesting to see which way works better here. One thing that I did really like about Taron Egerton's performance in the trailer is that we do obviously see aspects of him when he is, you know, before he is Elton John the showman and when he is just kind of finding his way and he's a lot less confident really. Taron Egerton does a great job of portraying that, you know, of making him seem a bit more shy, a bit more introverted, a bit more quiet and reserved. Obviously later on he becomes this big outgoing showman and his real self. To play both those aspects of a character, you know, different ends of the spectrum, is quite challenging and difficult, I imagine. So and Taron Egerton does a great job of that just in this trailer, so I think that'll be interesting to see that transformation in the film. Now I have seen some people saying online, you know, maybe we'll get some kind of Rami Malek cameo as Freddie Mercury in this film. I don't think that's going to happen. It is obviously possible because Freddie Mercury and Elton John were very good friends, they got on quite well, so it definitely makes sense in the story. I just think it's not going to happen. I think it's highly unlikely. If for no other reason than these are two films being made by two separate and different studios. 20th Century Fox made Bohemian Rhapsody, Paramount are making Rocketman, so that alone might be a bit of a problem. But in saying that, 20th Century Fox don't have exclusive rights to the Freddie Mercury character, I wouldn't imagine, so if they wanted Freddie to make a cameo in Rocketman, they could always just ask Queen and Rami. I assume that's all it would take, and he could be in that film, you know, without Fox having to really know. The other thing to remember is that both of these films, I believe, will feature the character of John Reid, who was Queen's manager as well as Elton John's manager for a time there. And I think he was also Elton John's romantic partner for a period. That character is in both of the films, played by a different actor, so that's a bit of a disconnect there, but that is pretty interesting to see who portrays that character closer to reality. So guys, let us know in the comments down below, what are your thoughts on the Rocketman trailers so far? Are you excited for this movie? Do you think it's going to be better or worse than Bohemian Rhapsody or other music biopics? How do you think these musical elements, the fantasy and all these kind of different unique things, how do you think that will affect people's opinion on this movie? And what do you think the success of Bohemian Rhapsody will do to this film? Will it help it? Will it hinder it? You know, what kind of effect will that have? Let me know down in the comments below. But until next time guys, thanks for watching and we'll see you later.